Welcome to our employment salon. We do this employment salons for audience of employment services, public employment and private employment services who are interested in specific topics about workforce development, about employability. Today's salon will be about advanced technology, a topic that concerns us in many ways. It is already in use for years. It's developing a lot and it causes a lot of opportunities and a couple of challenges that we would like to discuss today with an audience that is expert in this. We have around the table, the virtual table, we have Marie Galand and Roger Cohen from OrientaEuro in Belgium. We have Paul Toomey from Geographic Solutions Incorporated. We have Chet Carter from the Indiana Department of Workforce Development, Jeffrey Doucet from Thrive, and Josh Hjartarson from Deloitte. And we will be introducing all of you in a bit more detail in just a moment. I would like to give a brief introduction to the topic of employment services and advanced technology. And I'm not trying to explain IT to IT experts, just trying to contextualize a little bit where the topic is. So impact of advanced technologies and human resource management strategies in general concentrates on topics like job replacement, human robot AI collaboration, decision-making or decision preparation, learning opportunities, and in a more concrete manner and recruiting, it's just for preparing, recruiting, and delivering it, training and job performance. But it has a lot of non-technical aspects beyond the actual technology that you're using for it. It puts the emphasis on things like human skills and competencies, to look at, rethink often what the skills frameworks are that we're looking at. Leadership, I think, is a question that is heavily touched by advanced technology. Team coordination, then the whole organizational culture, if it's not just a on top, nice to have gimmick to have more technology, but if it's something that can heavily impacts the culture and the innovation mindset of a company or of an organization. You need new governance strategies in a couple of public environments, and the integration of technology employees is crucial to whether it's going to work or not. Ethical aspects in general are a big topic. For instance, whether technologies really can predict the future ability of growing concerns, discrimination, privacy. Is it explainable what you're using? Is it accountable? Who is accountable for it? What's the question of responsibility that all this data is generating? And for job seekers and workers, in a way, our main client, it has multiple dimensions that are at stake a little bit here: human dignity, individual autonomy, and just the position of the human in all this. In the more narrow field of employment services and workforce development that we're dealing here, they are using a lot of this technology already to mainly, I would say, the more advanced, and we will discuss that, of course, more in detail with you, to measure distance travels. How far is someone away from the labor market? How can that be measured in a granular manner, and how can that prepare and inform employability measures to get people closer to the labor market? Digital first approaches are heavily driven by the use of advanced technology, multimodal architectures using percentage of profile characteristics and just improving the matching. I think in general, one could say that matching profiling is becoming less bulky, more configurable. It's in a way smaller components. They allow more interactivity with the end user, which I think is great to give end users more control and empowerment of their customer journeys and their careers. And generative AI, that's also more and more used by the most advanced employment services. Use chatbots to reach out to groups that might not speak the native language. It helps writing CVs and vacancies, and we will see an example of that today. And we have also altogether the possibility for more engaging conversations with clients through AI technology. Plus, it's used in the departments of IT for finding bugs, suggesting code, etc. Large amounts of employability data are available, are generated, and a lot of employment services don't really know what to do with it. So that's something that they need help with, as to use it for decision making, but also to explain or use it for, let's say, strategy and frontline work. And the challenges, apart from the ones that I that I mentioned at the beginning, are of course that you need staff for this. And I'm not only talking about data scientists, tech engineers, and the kind of immediate type of staff, but you need also people that understand the whole process of advanced technology. It needs to be mainstreamed into the whole process of the company or organization. And there needs to be not only a mindset, but also a kind of more advanced set of skills to accommodate that. And that's something that we would like to discuss with you, where we are there, where you see the perspectives, and what kind of experiences you have in the cooperation that you are already undertaking with employment services. So, and on that note, I would like to hand over to Eamon to kick off the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miguel, and thank you for that excellent introduction to this very, very interesting and I think potentially challenging subject. I'd like to begin by warmly welcoming all of our guest discussants this afternoon and thank them very much for giving up their valuable time, hopefully to engage in a very fruitful discussion. We have Roger Cohen, a social entrepreneur and founding director of OrientaEuro, which is a social enterprise that cooperates with public employment services and indeed many, many other partners, and is involved currently in coaching over 7,000 people to improve their careers. And he's previously worked in Argentina and was a lecturer at the University of Buenos Aires. With Roger, a colleague, Marie Galand, who is a job coach at OrientaEuro. She previously worked in a number of different roles at Deloitte, the Belgian supermarket that employs over 15,000 people in Belgium, and she's been responsible for a number of very important functions, including talent and learning, IT project management, and has been a senior consultant at Deloitte in Belgium. I'd also like to welcome Paul Toomey, who is the president and founder of Geographic Solutions. Paul has worked for over 32 years in geographic information systems, programming, analysis, and management for both state and local governments in the United States and indeed a number of other countries. And in 1992, Paul founded Geographic Solutions. He holds multiple patents for software innovation in the workforce development and labour market information fields. We also have Chad Carter, who's the Director of Workforce Programs and Systems for the Indiana Department of Workforce Development in the United States. Chad has a very long track record in the human resources field, with a particular focus and interest in talent acquisition and management. Over his very long and distinguished career, he's held human resource leadership roles with the Rolls-Royce Corporation, Raytheon and ITT ESI. And in 2014, he joined the Department for Workforce Development in Indiana as the Director of Workforce Programs and Systems, where over the last decade, he's led multiple teams focusing on helping citizens in Hoosier, Indiana, and employers across the state to connect in better ways with their potential employees through innovative programs and system delivery. Finally, we have a couple of very distinguished participants from Canada. Jeffrey Doucet, who is the Chief Executive of Thrive Career Wellness Platform. Before this role, Jeffrey held positions as the Vice President for Finance and the Chief Finance Officer for the McMaster University Students' Union, and before that worked as a project analyst at the Correctional Service of Canada and holds a degree in political science. And last, but of course, absolutely by no means least, George Hjartarson is the National Human and Social Services Leader for Deloitte in Canada. Josh is involved in driving transformation in income assistance, social care and employment services, has a PhD in political science, and has worked as a public servant and senior advocate and champion in the Ontario business community in that province of Canada. So thank you all again very much for your time today. I'd like to start actually by bringing in Roger and then Marie for a couple of initial questions, particularly Roger. One of the subjects that comes up very, very frequently in many of the different activities that Miguel and I are involved in is a whole issue about data protection and privacy concerns. A theme emerges from people, practitioners in the field, that they do feel that the great advances in technology over the last 3, 5, and 10 years have raised a whole new raft of data protection and privacy concerns that are potentially causing people some kind of disquiet about the potential tools that they could utilize. I mean, do you have any observations about issues connected with data protection and privacy in the context of the new IT assisted systems that are available to employment service professionals? Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's definitely one of the main or the first questions that appears, especially in Europe after the GDPR legislation.
Yeah.
No, I think it was already like 8 years ago. So everybody is always concerned about that. What we did, because we cannot guarantee, the flow of the information that we can input artificial intelligence, for instance, we really insist all the time with the opt-in, like really explaining people that are going to use these tools, what it means, what are the limitations, also in terms of data protection. So, and we try to convince them not to include any personal data because it's really not necessary for the things that we are doing. And not only that, I would say we go a little farther. We also try to convince them not to include information that will clearly identify their gender, origin, etc., which has not to do so much with data protection, I would say, or privacy, but it's more, maybe it's another subject, but, avoiding all the bias and discrimination, etc. But both things have to do with the same idea, like you don't really need to input that data. If you can be careful enough, you can avoid that as much as possible. Then, yes, still, I would say, for instance, if you are inputting you are putting in your CV, even if you mask your first name, last name, email address, etc., still somehow some people would say, yeah, but still if you cross the different work experiences that you had, etc., I can still identify you. Okay, then we should all stop using LinkedIn, for instance, or, so there is some limit there, I think. So I'm not quite sure if I answered to your question, but as you can see, there are plenty of points that we could touch regarding that. Huh?
No, thank you, Roger. That was a very, very interesting introduction. I think what the point you're making very clearly is that anybody who expects total anonymity, really, that genie has been left the bottle probably many, many years ago. And clearly there's a responsibility on kind of service users as well to think carefully and intelligently about what they're doing. And maybe, I suppose, there's a wider public education issue somewhere because people probably don't always understand the potential implications. No, that was very interesting. And the points you make as well about wider identification of gender and other personal kind of characteristics, very interesting as well, which people often overlook actually in this kind of general discussion. So no, thank you. That's very, very interesting. I'd like to bring in your colleague, Marie, if I may, who I know has been involved in very much the operational delivery aspects of your organization. And Marie, I wonder if you have any thoughts about overall, how do you think that availing kind of, AI, other kind of IT support systems, how can that really add value to coaching and career guidance, I think, in organizations? So what are the real kind of benefits of utilizing AI, machine learning, and other such models in career guidance, do you think?
Well, I can tell you that it has added value. I was at first a little bit skeptical about that because job coaching is a human coach, and we think it's the only way to help people, usually as human coaches. But since a few months, we are testing a new tool that we implemented that talks to AI and that we feed with the client in coaching sessions. And there is an added value because we both take benefit from the AI and its force, its strengths, but also from the coaching session. So it's complementary in the sense that thanks to the job coaching session, we can really deepen with the client on his values, his patience, go back to previous experience talk and deepen things. And then we can put valuable inputs into our tool so that the output is also more valuable. And as coaches, we are there as human to also help the client to challenge the outcome of the tool, which is certainly a source of inspiration, but cannot be taken as granted, fully as granted. So yes, the interaction of the coach and the technology is really added value. And yes, it improves the result we have. There are some sessions that I had in the past, and I had my own limits, and then no, at that moment I say, okay, no, we can use the tool and we can go further and very quickly. That's also what helps, what people appreciate, is that we say, okay, so now we have talked 1 hour, we have a lot of input, we summarize that, we put it in the tool, and then let's arrange next meeting. In the meantime, 30 seconds later, we have the result with more input for the client to think about until next session. So, for example, about alternative career path for someone who willing to reorient, or if someone is more sure of what he wants to do, goes to an interview, we can have a really detailed job questions related to that job position based on his own profile. So, and things that I could not do in 30 seconds. It would take one more session. And so it gives me more time in the session to dedicate to the more human part of the coaching. So
thank you. Yes. Now that thank you. You describe a very nice kind of complementary approach where you're kind of maintaining the benefits of human contact, but adding the potential amount of value you can get from a discussion by using AI, which is very interesting. A couple of things occurred to me actually from that very interesting reply. Actually, one, how do the clients respond to the presence of the AI in the process? I mean, are most of them quite happy, or a few of them maybe slightly disconcerted by this wonderful new analysis you can kind of develop? How do they respond?
That's a good question. Well, so it's not mandatory that we will use the tool. So as Roger said, it's an opt-in. So I always ask if they are against, in favor, or neutral about AI. Well, most of them, I would say, I did not count, but I would say 80% of the clients are in favor. 20% are really 10% are really against, and 10% are more neutral, I would say. And then most of them, even if they have doubts, after they're really happy and really impressed. And yes, there are some people for which they are really against that, and for them we don't use it because it's not a good thing to do.
Thank you. It'd be fascinating to understand actually what the different motivations are for the people who are both very keen or maybe very against the use of AI. That's very interesting. And also, it's very interesting you describing how you encourage people to challenge the outcomes from the kind of the system as well, which is again an interesting dimension. You've explained lots of very positive potential uses of AI and enhancing the counselling role. Are there any challenges, particularly using this new kind of hybrid model? You've explained very nicely how there's a choice for people, but are there any issues where you think it can be a bit difficult in one session, kind of transiting from traditional human intervention and then moving into the technology-assisted part? Can it be problematic for a counsellor?
Well, I think the biggest challenge will be if the client doesn't want to use it. And then I had one case that then the client I felt was not feeling the same as before I told about AI, because he was thinking it was completely against his values, the AI. But in general, yes, when there is a conflict of value, it can be a little bit annoying for the rest of the session, but it happened to me only once. For the rest, I think the challenge is more before launching the tool, because when the client thinks that there will be maybe not good quality and so on, but after, most of the time, they are happy with the results. So all the time, in fact. So.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
If I can just add, because this value discussion is interesting. I read the other day there's a couple of studies. I forgot now by whom, but I can add that then to the video. That this value discussion is what makes people most distant from AI, because the AI cannot really produce values. It can only approximate values that are programmed. So it's a simulation, and people struggle with that. So just to give that as there is a perception that as soon as AI comes in, there might be a value issue that might be subconscious, but can play a role in how people view the services they're getting as less effective or less trustable.
Thank you, Miguel. Interesting how Marie mentioned there that only one client you record had a kind of value issue, whereas as we know from our kind of recent work, the issue of the values in this whole debate come up very frequently actually when they're kind of discussed with practitioners. And maybe, as you said, perhaps lots of the responses by clients are subconscious, but on a certain level, they've got some kind of negative or maybe even positive attitudes towards AI, which are reflected in the kind of outputs from the counselling interviews, which is very, very interesting. So thank you for that. I'd like now to bring in Paul, if I may. And Paul, from your own kind of very, very broad experience in the field, how far do you think that using technological solutions generally can help workforce development to develop far more tailored services? Delivering kind of individualized, personalized career guidance has been the holy grail for a long time. There's often been a view that we still tend to provide fairly generic services for people, but what do you think the scope is for IT to provide a really genuine, very holistic and very, very personalized approach to people using the services?
Yeah, I think that the use of generative AI has tremendous potential in that area. I mean, where we're seeing it being of great value is in areas that job seekers really struggle in. So the generation of a CV resume, and a comprehensive one that's customized to them, or even bespoke to the job that they're applying for. The ability to create a CV that's absolutely aimed at that particular job. We're finding that AI has tremendous potential in that. And then obviously on the employer side, in a very similar way, that I can have the AI create a set of interview questions that are very specific to this particular candidate and this particular job, as well as obviously obvious things such as creating a good job description. Another thing we're kind of which I think is a bigger and bigger emphasis that we're seeing in the US now is this concept of what we're calling no wrong door. So particularly regarding to various different benefit programs that somebody may be looking for help with, where it's just so spread out amongst different departments and different areas in the US. The idea of providing a system where it will ask you certain questions and then guide you directly to the appropriate area and the appropriate benefits and help that you can get in looking for a job and looking for looking for help.
Yeah, thank you. So no wrong door seems to potentially really incredibly broaden the kind of access to appropriate information for potential clients, which sounds very efficient actually on all sorts of levels. I was struck by the point you made there about the ability for very, very personalized questions to be developed by AI, which on the one hand sounds absolutely perfect because it's a great opportunity for a candidate to really show their best in an interview. But do you think there's a potential downside as well? Because any interview, I suppose, is always going to be a process where there's never total transparency between people, both sides of the table. Can you think of people who might be a bit disadvantaged when the machinery can really generate questions that are unusually probing, actually? Because perhaps some people fare better or worse with very probing questions, if you see what I mean. But fascinating.
I mean, yes, I mean, there has to be limits, obviously, on how you use personal information. You got to avoid obviously sharing that. And you have to realize, whatever you're submitting to like a chat GPT is out there at that point. So you have to be very careful on what's shared there. But I think actually, I know there is a lot of feeling that AI can be intrusive and can be a disadvantage to certain individuals, whereas actually I feel it's the opposite. So for example, right now, if you're a wealthy individual, you probably can pay to have your CV reviewed and updated and improved, whereas AI gives that opportunity to everybody, right? It's regardless of of your financial background and so on. So I think there is a lot of potential for AI to even the playing field as opposed to going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, no, thank you. Very interesting. So with the appropriate kind of guardrails, it could be a way of actually improving labour market access for people who some find it quite difficult to compete with other people who can't access the expensive professional guidance that gives other people a seat at the front of the queue, really. Yeah, very interesting.
We often get asked the question, should a CV or a cover letter created by AI be labeled as such? But I mean, I look at it, when I'm an employer looking at somebody's CV, I don't know if it was created by a CV service or by their parents or so I see it very similar in that sense.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point, actually, because I've actually heard that discussion, strangely enough, quite recently. And what occurred to me was, but how many people have actually used somebody with a lot of professional expertise to write their CV for them anyway? But when something's new, it generates this almost slight paranoia about people about something quite insidious. But nobody gives a second thought to whether somebody crafted the CV themselves or got somebody from a very eminent position to write it for them. So, no, interesting. Thank you. And the no wrong doors sounds like it could be a very, very useful mechanism for allowing people a lot more support more quickly as well. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to bring in Chad now, if I may, pursuing a couple of the points that Paul just raised then, really. Chad, one subject that's really frequently discussed is the whole issue of profiling. Public employment services have been talking about profiling for probably, in my knowledge, 20 or 30 years. How much profiling really produces individual outputs that look at somebody's position on the labour market, or how much sometimes they're fairly generic outputs, can often depend from country to country. But I think, Chad, from your perspective, is AI starting to really have an impact on profiling and matching in any particular way?
I think so overall. One of the big ways that I see it right now, within our unemployment insurance side of our business, we effectively have to profile individuals based on a lot of different factors on how quickly or not quickly are they going to exhaust their unemployment insurance. And so there is some algorithms and there's actually some AI that has been developed that kind of helps line out those individuals as we kind of go through some of the processes within that. Also on the workforce side of things, working with employers, there's definitely tools and components that are out there that help to profile people's backgrounds, education. AI is getting very good at pulling out lots of things with that. I think in the US specifically, over the years, we've been so focused on really keyword search and educational attainment. Things are shifting now with the introduction of AI to really more skills, ability, and competency within certain areas versus just your educational background. You can go out to YouTube, you can go, get classes online that will, bring you light years ahead of taking some college courses at times. And so I think those tools, as they're being developed, have great advantage to things. The other piece that our agency is really focused on right now is we have been working over the last year on a tool called the Workforce Recommendation Engine. And there is some AI that's embedded within that. And as part of that, what it does is as an individual applies for, if they lose their job, they apply for unemployment insurance, they're asked a set of base questions, and based on how they respond to that, then they are given tailored job postings as well as trainings that are available to them. And that whole program is being rolled out right now. So it's at the very infant stages of everything, but that's one other area where I see profiling come into play, at least within our agency.
Yeah, I think you're very interesting.
Can
Obviously,
I ask a question? Sorry for
Yeah,
always
please,
coming
come
in. Because you mentioned, Chad, something that is also big discussion in other parts of the world, in Europe. That's a skills-based approach, moving away from qualifications. It's more kind of official things that we like to put on CVs, to a more, what can I actually do? And I have the feeling that North America is being quite ahead in that development for a number of years. So my question to you would be, from your point of view, do you have the feeling that this more skills-based approach to look at what what people, what competencies people have, as opposed to what can they prove on paper, is that something that has arrived in the employers' mindsets, or is it something that is still coming a lot from the realities of how job seekers present themselves? Do you think employers understand that they need to look at skills more than at actual qualifications and degrees?
I think the answer to that, unfortunately, it depends. There are some employers that I think have really bought into that mindset and methodology. I think there are others that are, kind of slow to kind of garner that. Within the US right now, kind of across the board, our unemployment's extremely low right now. And so we keep hearing a kind of a call out there that employers have all these job openings, but when I talk to people that are looking for jobs, they're struggling to get offers from employers right now. So there's a disconnect in the market right now based on, I think, a lot of factors. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I think the word that I used with somebody the other day, it's a funky cycle that we're in right now. That we do have a ton of job opportunities. Employers are looking for people. We have people that are looking for jobs, and those connections aren't being made. And part of that's probably based off of employers are being extremely selective on who they're hiring right now, and they're trying to find a perfect match versus taking somebody with 80% and training the other 20. Could be a lot of different things, but it is an odd market right now.
Thank you very much, Chad. I mean, as Miguel said, in Europe for a long time, the emphasis has really been, I think, more on attempting to improve statistical-based profiling, combined with some kind of counsellor judgment, really. But I think there's a prevailing view now that, given the whole massive amount of changes in the world of work, skills-based profiling has got to be the way to go, actually. But I think in North America, overall, I think you have been somewhat ahead of that for quite a time. How far have the counsellors still got a role in this kind of activity, do you think, Chad, given, how far you can get a very, very accurate profile using the new technology? Do you see the role of the counsellor there being an added kind of judgment and kind of offering another perspective, or do you think they're going to be increasingly kind of sidelined a bit by the ability to use this very sophisticated skills-based profiling technology?
Sure. I think it's going to be a process of moving people along a continuum with that. But I think for the job counselors that we have across our state, and as I talk to other states, because of the population that we're called to work with under the laws that we work with, we work with people that have significant barriers to employment, and that can be a lot of different factors within that. So our career counselors are still, very customer centric in what they need to do on their end. Yeah. AI really becomes a tool to help within that process versus trying to be the be all of making the total match and everything on our side of things. So our coaches are still, extremely engaged with the end customer, and they have to be, because a lot of them are very, low on the computer literacy factor. So
thank you.
I would love to weigh in on that one if I could.
Yeah,
I've been
please
chomping
do.
at the bit. Okay, great. So I actually think, and I want to make a couple of linkages here. So the phenomenon of that you described, Chad, around the employers without workers and the workers without employers at the same time. We're sort of in a very, very tight labor market, and it's absolutely true all over the world. So we are working in Sweden and Australia and Belgium and in Canada, of course, the United States, and the phenomenon is secular all around the world. And my view is one of the big challenges is, and to link it, is around the barriers that you just described, right? And more we see employers willing to invest in ways that they haven't been willing to previously, in part because of these stark shortages. One of the promises around that we're seeing in the deployment of AI, and let's say AI is part of the digital value chain, right? So it's an important part, the job matching, but there's also the career pathways, there's also the resume building, et cetera. Because we're seeing more and more our clients really focusing on the segmentation. I think the word profiling was used before, but segmentation, and creating digital self-serve channels for those individuals who either prefer or want to or can access digital channels to allow, as you described, Chad, more caseworker and in-person time for those individuals requiring, who have barriers, who require more in-person intervention. And the other thing that's sort of ticking above and structurally is the fact that there are real fiscal constraints. Many of our governments are highly indebted as a result of the expenditures during COVID. And so you're going to see a lot of fiscal pressure in this sector as well. And so the ability to create viable self-serve digital channels with caseworker interventions at strategic points, I think, is going to become the norm across. And we've had the pleasure of working with Jeff and Thrive on a number of instances in implementing these types of solutions. So there you go.
Yeah, so you've got a kind of a vision of the future where kind of online skills databases and very much kind of clients kind of pulling down information and managing their own kind of reintegration journeys is going to become the norm, you think, for the majority of them potentially? Yeah.
For a portion. I think that one of the things that we've learned from, early forays into digital in this space is there's a role for clearly for many job seekers, but we talk about digital by desire, and I think Marie alluded to this earlier. There are some seekers who will want to. There are some seekers, job seekers who can, but there are those individuals who simply don't want to, don't have access, don't have the digital literacy. But then the tool can act as the employment counselor augmentation. I mean, a good example, it used to take 2 to 3 hours of an employment counselor's time to sit down and build a resume, right? That can be done in a matter of seconds now, right? So I think it's digital, and AI is a structural factor for every actor in the ecosystem now. It varies, and its deployment varies on the type of job seeker.
Yeah, perhaps one final question for you before I bring in our final colleague who we've not spoken to yet. But is there a potential danger that if the default position is kind of people making the initial connection online, that some people will fall at the first hurdle? Is there an issue about making sure we've got the infrastructure to still catch people who will always need that traditional intervention, at least initially, before they perhaps maybe start to be helped with maybe AI solutions? But is there a chance they won't see the kind of, or be able to use the digital doorway into the support ecosystem, as you referred?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to let Jeff speak to this because but the way more and more countries are deploying these tools is there are fail safes. So if, for example, an individual self-selects or is referred based on their segmentation and the results of their assessment, but they ghost the profile, they fail to set up their profile, they ghost the platform, et cetera, then that can create space for an automated referral. This becomes particularly important in jurisdictions that have really strong mutual obligation, e.g., if you're not engaged in your job search, we are going to deny you your benefits.
Yeah.
So this is all part of like and this is where a lot of the nuance is in the types of implementations that occur. And every jurisdiction, every state, for example, the US Chad, it's a miracle. You got 50 some different, types of ecosystems in the way that the federal rules are implemented. In Canada, it's the same. You have 13.
Yeah.
And the rules will all vary. And so you can't just bolt on the solution, but there's actually a lot of configuration that needs to happen. I don't know, Jeff, if you want to.
Well, what we've seen on this, topic a lot of the time around the world is that, when you're looking at deploying software to support an employment ecosystem, is often one of the questions we get, which is well-founded in its intention is, okay, we've got a certain percentage of our ecosystem that we think is digitally literate or wants to use technology or is in a position to use technology. So we're going to, take them over here and we're going to put them on some sort of digital delivery model. And then, we're going to take 40, 60, whatever the number is, % of our caseload, and we're going to run them through a traditional program. And we think that's a bad approach for a number of reasons. We don't think everyone's in a position to right off the bat use digital delivery or be using self-driven digital tools, but we think that there's a role for software to play in augmenting the delivery of everyone's job search. And, that's where we've, been successful in various jurisdictions of using software to like stream delivery augmented by technology. So, some individuals are on, what I would call self-driven paths. Some are being associated to caseworkers that are using technology on a day-to-day basis to coach and support individuals. But one of the goals we like to strive towards is, I fundamentally believe that everyone that goes through an employment ecosystem should come out more digitally literate and digitally enabled. If that's a secondary goal that you set for your employment ecosystem, I think you're going to be happy with the outcomes that you're driving, for individuals. We were just speaking about, the role and the skills gap that people are facing in the labor market. And a lot of that skills gap is being driven, by digital gaps that employers are facing and digital skill sets that employers are facing. We do, I'd say selling our software to governments, for context, is about 30% of our business. And 70% of it is selling to large corporations and helping upskill and reskill and move individuals around. And when we work with large corporations like a Walmart, for example, that hires everyone from senior executives down to hourly workers, literally every part of their value chain is digitally enabled in some way, shape, or form. And they're expecting that. And so we're really, working with governments to design pathways that don't result in what you described, which is someone coming into a digital pathway, having a bad experience, falling off because they require more support, but, working to use software to augment that whole journey. The second thing we often run into, which is an interesting topic that I love to bring up, is, I'd say digital literacy in the employment services ecosystem is fairly low amongst, individuals that are working, delivering services. I like to tell a story. We played a large role in a very large transformation here in the province of Ontario. And about 18 months ago, when we were, getting ready to launch, we ran a large scale pilot. And as part of that pilot, we put 400 unemployed job seekers through the platform, and we put 100 career coaches through the platform. And we asked the job seekers and we asked the career coaches their comfort with software on a day-to-day basis and their comfort with using technology to support their job. And we actually found that job seekers were more comfortable with software than the individuals working in employment centers. And that's, I think a huge challenge we face. And what we found a lot of the times is that sometimes aversion to technology and an aversion to being able to use software to augment the value chain for job seekers actually manifests itself as, I'd say, a skill gap or a hesitancy that our clients face amongst their workforce. And that, has been really interesting for us and something that I always like to bring up, because at the end of the day, as a technology solution, we can build the best software in the world, but if the people that are paid to work on it and interface with, the clients aren't comfortable, we're never going to get to where we want to go from supporting job seekers. It's been really interesting learning for us.
Thank you. I mean, you raised lots of really interesting points there. I mean, I won't mention the countries because that wouldn't be appropriate, but there are now more than anecdotes that there is sometimes resistance from kind of employability professionals and others from the technology. Different reasons being quoted, some of them about their own kind of professional judgment being undermined, but clearly there can be an issue there about staff resistance to potentially use new systems, which is interesting.
Maybe at this point, sorry,
perhaps,
Eamon, maybe at this point, just before you continue, we could bring in Marie, who is working basically with it, because you said in the beginning that, Marie, that you're very happy with this using AI at the moment. But it maybe was not the case in the beginning. Can you share a little bit more about your experience when you started working with it, and also what your colleagues maybe thought about it, or how the actual implementation of it was, and what might have been concerns around it?
Your journey with AI, Marie, would be very interesting to hear, how you've come to be a lot very enthusiastic about the support you get from it. I mean, perhaps you didn't feel that the first time you were using the new systems.
First, the system did not exist completely. We were in the creation of it, and Roger asked me to participate in the creation, and I was thinking, what, using AI for coaching? What a strange idea. But in the end, I have an IT background, as you said, and I'm open to technology. So I said, okay, I will check and I will see what it gives. The reason I had concerns, and I think it's the same for some of my colleague coach, was it will give so basic results, standard results, like the ones when you type in Google, I want a cover letter, and you have a standard cover letter, which doesn't make the difference. And that you just copy paste and everybody has the same. And so your cover letter is not useful. So my idea was it will not bring quality, it will not be personalized, it will be not authentic, what we will see as a result. And then I tested the first version of our tool called ICA, or Artificial Intelligence Career Coaching Assistant. And I was kind of surprised at the first trial, but then still we worked on it and we tested it with real cases from clients on how to improve our interface and the way we will address our questions to the AI so that the results are really valuable. And so I think that makes a huge difference. Is what you input will make a difference on the output, of course. And sometimes, very often, if in fact, less is more. So putting really the essential is the most important. And I think that's where the job coach can play a role by digging into what the individual has in his background, but asking question and question and question so that we have the right information and can input the good information into the tool.
Something, Eamon, because Marie was not the only job coach that was kind of against, I must say. In her case, it's clear why or what were her doubts. I would say that other coaches were also reluctant because, let's be honest, they are afraid of losing their jobs. We need to put that on the table always, not to make as if it couldn't happen at all. And sometimes it was weird because they could pass in a second from an answer like the quality that we obtain or that we could obtain from that is very low, it doesn't matter, to the fear that they will lose the job because the quality is very good. So what we were working on is to show them, okay, it's a complementary thing that you will use, and it doesn't mean that you are going to lose your job, but your job will be more focused on the human-centered part of the coaching skills, etc., and less in the more practical things like drafting a cover letter or reviewing information or looking for so much information. I mean, but it's impossible to beat these type of tools in terms of, for instance, the knowledge that it has in thousands and thousands of professions. None of our job coaches could have that knowledge. So even for the thing that Marie was saying in the beginning, like preparing job interview questions and answers, first you need to really know that specific job that the person wants to do. And if it's generic things, that's great. But, with all the varieties of jobs that we can have, it's impossible. or to make a proper skills gap analysis, as we are doing with this tool in a second. I mean, we can really compare a job offer with your CV or or your LinkedIn profile, and immediately have ideas of how to work, and upskilling, reskilling, what are the gaps, etc. It's impossible. So, and it's not that we are showing that to the coaches, to threaten them, but not at all. It's to say, okay, profit from that, because if you don't do it, many of our clients will do it themselves somehow, maybe spending a lot of time, etc. But the ones that can, they will do it themselves. So it's better to adopt it, and to put again the focus and most of your time to things that, at least for the moment, are not replaceable by AI.
Thank you.
We-
You please, yes, come in. Thank you.
So we did a survey of caseworkers here in Canada, and and I think it's universal as well. They had two major challenges that was contributing to burnout, et cetera. The first is the administrative burden, right? The administrative burden of their jobs. And the second was the sheer volume of caseload, right? And that was impeding their ability to provide high quality services to individuals. So Roger, totally agree with your point. Here is an opportunity to streamline administrative processes and really concentrate the employment counselor and the caseworker on the high value add activities. No one signs up to be an employment counselor or a caseworker in this space to do 12 hours a week of administrative paperwork, right? And if we can use AI to lower that burden, at the same time overcoming, which I think is a real challenge in the employment counselor world, is the so-called proximity bias, right? Refer to programs that you know and trust, refer to employers that you know and trust, as opposed to looking at the person's profile and understanding the full scope of what's available to them. Trust and intuition is an important part, but it can't be just the only part, because that just is more friction in that job seeker's journey.
Thank you. You raised a couple of interesting thoughts there, actually. Removing this kind of proximity bias is probably essential to make the best use of the ecosystem. I think that your colleague was mentioning, because without that, we're not going to take advantage of all the potential links. But again, I think what you've been referring to, and also Roger as well, is that technology can clearly remove a lot of the kind of admin kind of activities and give more space for using the kind of intuition and interpersonal skills of counsellors. But how far away are we from the technology starting to kind of replace some of those kind of intuitive kind of aspects of the job? Or do you think that's perhaps a bit of a fallacy, really? Or do you think the counsellor's role could start to get diminished a bit because the AI can do things at the moment that we think really do add that human touch to the discussion?
I mean, I think that my answer to that would be that it should be freeing people up to do higher quality, higher value work.
Yeah.
And it should be a big creep. Like, I have yet to meet an employment ecosystem across the world that says, yeah, you know what, we've got some free resources and we're kind of we're booked wide open on Thursdays and Fridays for the next 3 weeks. Like, we're trying to figure out what to do. Most employment ecosystems are overwhelmed, with workload and with challenges that's further being exacerbated by, various issues, socially and that we're seeing, and the various challenges that they're facing with, whether it's addiction issues or, challenges that we're seeing in the employment centers. And so, like I would take, obviously, as a technology lead, like, take the optimistic side of it. And then the second part of it is, what we're seeing personally is a growing role of employment services in connecting the dots to other social services that are funded by governments, right? So, if we're able to free up time that someone's writing a resume, and we can leverage technology to refer them to proper training programs or social housing or assistance, like, driving more connectivity through the ecosystem is another thing that we're seeing, governments strive to do. So I know Josh has a lot of thoughts on this, but I'd say technology is allowing, the role to expand and deliver better services. And I think most critically, which we haven't really touched on when we're talking about freeing up caseload is enabling employment ecosystems to divert their resources to the more challenging issues they're facing with their caseload, right? Ideally, if you can serve someone that's low barrier faster, that frees you up to spend more time with someone that's in your office that is facing a lot of barriers and requires more support. And I think that's really what we're all trying to do to enable better outcomes.
Thank you. Perhaps if I could bring Chad back to kind of pick up on something that has been raised in my mind by what you've just mentioned. Actually, Chad, you were talking earlier about the no wrong doors approach and the ability for lots more information to be gathered about individuals. But are there any issues that people can now be very much an open book? At one time, with the old kind of purely clerical systems, somebody was at liberty to withhold quite a lot of information if they wanted, which may not have been helpful to them. But on the other hand, sometimes there may have been good reasons for not wanting to be so exposed, I suppose, to a discussion perhaps with the employment service or government. But do you think it's kind of helpful in your role, with the UI scheme and dealing with the more vulnerable clients, that now it's more difficult for people to hide, I suppose, for want of a better phrase? Or do you think there should still be a degree of people thinking, I really would rather the state didn't know about this particular aspect of my perhaps past life or current life? What's your view on how transparent the system should be?
Well, I think that because from a government regulation perspective, there are things that we have to require and things that we can get away with without requiring things. Actually, for the last 10 years, I've worked closely with Paul Toomey and his organization to help from a system perspective to really make things as open and available to individuals without really diving into the PII of their lives within our systems. Now, once you get into more intensive services, because of the Department of Labor and other rules that we have to follow under, there are things that individuals have to disclose to us. But we try to make it as easy as we can at the front end to allow people to job search, to network, to do certain things without giving really any information to us as a state as possible. There are some rules around, Social Security number and other components that, we have to be very careful of, just because of the rampant theft of identity that can be out across the world. And I think, from an AI perspective, because AI does now have the capability of taking any of us and doing an auto-generated version of us online, as well as stealing our voice patterns. Those are the big concerns that I hear from customers, as we kind of, head down these certain paths within AI.
Thank you. Perhaps Paul, then, perhaps I could bring you in. I noted with interest your past experience of working with geographic information systems. I was reading something about profiling a couple of months ago, and they were talking about really introducing very much kind of private sector marketing type segmentation models, using something I think that were called psychographic factors. So the idea was you look at where somebody lives with an incredible degree of local detail. You learn a lot more about all their kind of hobbies, kind of what they read, other sites they kind of look at in their kind of leisure time, and use that to build up a picture of the individual, which is then added to the traditional kind of analysis of their skills, qualifications, etc. I mean, I suppose, Paul, from your perspective, where do you think the guardrails need to be in that kind of environment where you can have incredibly detailed information about somebody to that extent? Does it give you any cause for concern as a kind of model applying that kind of deep, personal, localized analysis of somebody's situation?
I think it's a concern, particularly because that information can be unreliable. But so I think that's actually becoming more and more of a common practice among employers to use various different sources to do deep research on someone before interview or before making an offer. We don't see that much in the public sector because it really, is considered crossing a line, I think, in providing that kind of that kind of information. So, you know, it's, but I know that it's much more and more common now in the private sector for employers to be doing that kind of research. I mean, there are various different services you can subscribe to now.
Yeah.
We'll create an entire profile on somebody. I mean, I've seen them on myself, and I didn't think they were very accurate.
Yeah. You used the phrase crossing the line. I think that's a very appropriate kind of a description, actually. But I think a view from certain perspectives is that the line keeps moving further and further, and it's impossible to ever move the line back, really. I mean, with apologies for rather a general statement, but do you think that's where we are? Or is there going to be a stage where people are going to be able to kind of hold the line for a while and review this? Or is it just going to be accepting more and more things next year that are not considered particularly appropriate this year, really?
Well, I think the definition of, as you say, the line becomes more difficult as technology just provides more opportunity, right, to access information on individuals. So, I mean, at some point, that becomes a government, I guess, duty to define what's appropriate there.
Yeah.
Talking about the government, sorry, Eamon.
No, carry on.
I think one of the main, let's say, challenges that employment services are facing, especially the public ones that represent the government, is that they're often in a role conflict. They pay out benefits, not everywhere, but in many jurisdictions, they're involved in providing basically support for people who have lost their jobs or are in hardship. At the same time, they're also supposed to help them with job search and developing their employability and their careers. In working with employers, sometimes they are in the double role of looking at the job quality, being in a kind of inspector role at the same time trying to service them. So there is a role conflict that very often causes that the image of the public employment services is not very good, or that the actual operational service does not work very well. I see in the use of advanced technology and all the advantages that it has and that you mentioned, a chance to move more away from the government to an ecosystem that would not have the government as a prime provider of services, but more as a kind of manager and governing body of how the employment service system works, having a mixture of self-service, attention to vulnerable groups by experts, local experts, and private providers. What's your view on the role of the government in the future? Is there a perspective that the government will move away from operational services that happen already in a couple of jurisdictions, or is happening, and that advanced technology and expert providers that are from the third sector or private sector are doing the job instead of the government moving in?
Yeah, so anybody got a view of whether the government will simply be a convening role, providing very high-level infrastructure, maybe the kind of very broadly drawn guardrails, but leaving it to the ecosystem to evolve organically? Or do people think really the state will always have a fairly central role in this kind of business or area of administration? Anybody got a particular view on that they'd like to share with us?
Yes. Do I? Oh, my favorite topic in the world, the role of government in the context of employment services change. So the way we look at it, we've actually advised several governments on this exact topic, because for lots of reasons, the structural changes in the economy, moving from labor surplus to labor shortage, also the differentiated need in our ecosystem. So the profile of the unemployed individual has changed, and Jeff alluded to this earlier. We see the rise of addiction, mental health issues, etc. The notion that the employment counselor, the government employment aid, can be a catch-all intake service person, that illusion is quickly falling away, and the recognition that government needs to partner, right? So, you know, as Miguel mentioned, many jurisdictions are vacating their role and actually looking for more contracted out models. I think contracted models now are kind of the norm, and in this role, it's not like government is abdicating its role, but it's actually taking on more of a system steward. right? So in traditional contracted models, the government will have a series of individual contracts and it manages those contracts, and that's the sum total of their role. Instead, now they're pulling back and they're thinking about all the levers that they need to pull in order to ensure the health of the ecosystem. A classic example is one of the ironies of the public employment service / workforce development boards is that they're suffering a severe shortage of workers, right? And in a contracted out ecosystem, everyone's competing for workers. And it's the role of the steward to actually think about what are the career pathways? How do we recruit people into this? To overcome the biases that towards collaboration in a highly competitive, contracted out ecosystem. There are others as well. I call it the democratization of labor market information. Putting it, and again, that is something in a contracted ecosystem where, for example, the incentive is for the contracted entity to hoard the information. But instead, you actually, as a steward, have a role in ensuring that, that again, employers, individual job seekers, not necessarily just clients of employment services, have access to that information. So and we've worked with a couple of clients to actually move them away from some of the myths that actually, no, you're abdicating your role, but your role changes, right? And in the aggregate, what it means is that steward role is really trying to reduce the aggregate friction that exists between employers and workers. And there's so many levers, even if you're not in direct delivery, there's so many levers that need to be pulled to play that role. There you go. That was my 30 seconds or a minute on something I could talk about for 10 hours.
Thank you. Very interesting. I've often thought that asymmetric access to labour market information is one of the biggest causes of labour market disadvantage, actually. So you're creating a kind of very positive picture that a lot of this could be very liberating for some of the more disadvantaged people furthest from the labour market. I wonder if yourself or any colleagues around the discussion have got a view about how far this leads us to customer co-creation of services. Miguel and I have been involved in some discussions over the last couple of years with a view that, as a concept, I suppose, you could theoretically involve the beneficiaries of programs really upstream in designing some of their own kind of reintegration products as a concept. But how practical do yourself or any colleagues around the call think that might be, that eventually there could be a lot more input from beneficiaries or beneficiaries advocates in the design of active labour market programs, so they become customers and providers at the same time, potentially? Is it feasible?
Yeah, so I'm going to 10 seconds on this, and I mean, one of the challenges, and I'll talk to the proximity bias, right? And let's talk about it at the individual job seeker level. So, for example, I'm a truck driver. I've hurt my back. I can't do it anymore. I can't be away from my family, or whatever variable is, and we have a natural tendency of proximity bias to sort of say, okay, well, if it's not a truck driver, I know Fred over here does this. What the truck driver was that? So this notion of, if you can provide, and again, the democratization of labor market information is actually, you have 60% to be of the qualifications to be a logistics manager in an Amazon warehouse. But I never would have thought of that, right? So that's one of the great things about, like, for example, this is one of the features of the Thrive platform, is giving the individuals the information that they need across a wider range of resources, so they can actually make decisions, as opposed to deferring to your job counselor or deferring to what you already know. So I absolutely believe co-creation or co-production of a job pathway is absolutely a critical success factor for a lot of individuals.
One of the interesting things on that subject, just quickly, is earlier we were talking about, how employer, hiring based on competencies and hiring based on skills. And a lot of the conversation was around how ready are employers for that, right? And I would argue that employers are way further ahead than individuals that are in their career. What I mean by that is, individuals, and for at least from our experiences, tend to want to do what they were already doing. They would like to have a very often, sometimes the same job that they used to have, because that's what they know. Second, they've been taught since they were in high school to think of their career on an occupation and role and skill and education basis versus skills and competencies, right? So, people typically will tell you, I was an account executive doing sales, versus, I have these skill sets that have been honed in this job, and like they can be translated to other opportunities. And so, I always feel like there's this interesting push and pull with regards to like providing the customer what they want, but then at the same time, pushing the information in front of someone in a way that's digestible, and that allows them to sometimes think differently about what they actually need to move their career forward.
Thank you very much. Sadly, the time goes incredibly quickly. We're having these very interesting kind of discussions, but I wanted to end on a couple of kind of quite practical questions. Be grateful for the views of anybody about how they think the solution might be to some of these issues. Following any of the kind of reports, the trade press, general kind of articles, you pick up on things every now and again about some fairly serious issues that emerge from the application of technology. I read recently about a couple of online property sites that were kind of redlining or rejecting people from certain ethnic groups for reasons that nobody could quite work out, even kind of digging quite a long way into the black box. I've heard about hallucinating chatbots and people stopping using when they've realized the chatbots are creating some quite surreal pictures of people following the kind of discussions. A lot of trial and error. Is it an essential implication of applying new technology that you're going to discover things go wrong, quite seriously wrong for providers and service users, and then you stop? Or is there more that could be done to kind of identify some of these kind of glitches in the system before they cause quite a lot of problems? Is it just a feature that's always been there, but it becomes more transparent when people start to think about AI? But we've always made mistakes like that, but perhaps they weren't as public before. Any views on that, really?
Yeah,
I'll go quickly.
no, please, feel free.
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, I think as humans, we become very accustomed to technology improving really fast. And I sometimes laugh at the high expectations we have of our artificial intelligence right now. Like if we build a resume for someone and it's like 90% perfect, people will get upset and say it's 10% wrong, but it took like 2 minutes to get 90% of the way there, and we couldn't do that 3 years ago. Like we're kind of happy about that, right? So first, there's this like high level of expectations, I think, in AI right now, and there is this like literacy that needs to happen on. This is still a recommendation, and we are still doing our best. Just like if I go on Google and I search for the top 10 restaurants in Toronto, I'm going to evaluate what the results are and probably look at them to see if I want to actually go eat there. We are almost expecting AI to be perfect. I think, that's, comment number one. The second one is, I don't think like taking in, like earlier we were talking about not receiving data that's too personally identifying as a way to put guardrails. We don't think that's a good solution to the problem. Like we think as a technology vendor, it's our job to actually make sure that whatever someone gives us is safe and protected and not shared in an irresponsible way, right? So if I'm too worried about sharing your phone number, that I just say, don't give me your phone number, like I'm not doing my job to make sure that I'm managing your data properly. And then third, again, by technology, I'm going to take the optimistic view is humans are biased, right? Like humans tend to be very biased. I think we could, we know that humans are flawed. We're finding technology is making it easier for us to remove biases from humans, right? So when we roll out our recruiting tools to employers, we remove personal identifiers, we remove names and ethnicities, we make sure they can't see what someone's gender is, because we all know there's a lot of data that shows that humans will actually use that data subconsciously to, make a biased decision, right? So we believe like technology will actually augment the capacity for us to remove bias in the ecosystem, but it all comes down to vendors, properly using the information they're given by their users.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Roger, you had some thoughts on this subject as well, please. So
yeah, I agree with Jeffrey that, the bias that we can find nowadays in AI, for instance, it's just an amplifier of the bias of the data that, they were using to teach the systems. So there are bias that exist, unfortunately, because of the bias that we as human beings have. And I do our best. I mean, we do our best to avoid all the discrimination, bias, etc. But I cannot guarantee that at some point a human job coach will be, 100% free of any type of bias, depending on the person that they have in front of them, because there are some sources of information that it's unavoidable. You see directly in most of the cases the gender, you see their language level, you see several things, and then you as a human being, you must try to avoid any type of bias based on that. Even with the best intentions that you could have, you still have a huge challenge to avoid that. Whereas in cases where either because we are masking the data or because we are asking people not to put that info, etc., odds are lower. Still, a system can identify somehow the pattern indirectly, because, for instance, if some gender is much more represented in some type of jobs, at the end, it will somehow guess the gender. But still, so what I'm trying to say is that I think, as Jeffrey said, we are, asking too much of technology, or much more than we are asking humans. The good point of that is that, okay, we still bring again to the table the questions of trying to avoid discrimination, trying to avoid all these biases. But I think we should work in both areas, like in technology, but also in human beings.
Thank you. I think that's a very nice note, actually, probably to end on, because I suppose what you're explaining, Roger, is there's a lot of perhaps sometimes kidology about this perfect bias-free world that was there before, that of course is patently not the case, and maybe some fundamentally kind of odd misconceptions about what the kind of technology is meant to be providing for us. So thank you very much indeed. Before I hand back to Miguel for some final observations, I was reading recently that I think when the first railways were built in my country, the United Kingdom, some people were saying that the human body could not stand the strain of travelling more than 15 miles an hour without being destroyed. And so therefore, people shouldn't actually allow any kind of what they thought then was quite fast rail travel. And of course, applying that thought now, 200 years later, sounds absolutely crazy. So there's a perspective that a lot of the concerns about AI are based on kind of paranoia that was the same as people who thought it was very bad if people ever kind of travelled in the first railways. Or the other end of the spectrum is perhaps people thinking we're really entering a very, very, very different world that's a total kind of paradigm leap from anything we've been in before, and maybe people haven't quite caught up with all the implications of it. But thank you all very much for an absolutely fascinating discussion. I think we could probably continue talking for a lot longer, actually, but unfortunately we are coming to the end of our 90-minute slot. I'd like to thank all of our guests for their really, really fascinating and stimulating interventions. Left me with an absolutely vast amount of food for thought, actually. I've been scribbling lots of things down myself, and no doubt perhaps some of us may have the chance to discuss this issue in different configurations again, hopefully in a not too distant future. So thank you all very much for your excellent contributions. And I hand back to Miguel now for perhaps some final observations from listening to this very, very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all for a lot of food for thought. We do these salons also to just foster discussions around the topics, and maybe also have someone see it and say, okay, I want to talk to this lady or this guy because there's something interesting to say, and we would like to get a little bit of advice on it. So I heard a lot of positive things about advanced technology and employment services. For example, one interesting thought is that 80% of in the examples we said that 80% of clients are in favor of using AI, and that clients more often are inclined to do it, even more than the staff that is supposed to use it. So there's actually quite a lot of readiness to try that out. So all discussions about how negative it can impact careers, for example, or the advice procedure as such, are not rooted in the real expectations. We also heard that it has an incredible potential, the use of advanced technology, especially AI, to help job seekers improve their journey with things where they traditionally struggle. For example, putting together a CV or make a CV stand out rather than the traditional copy paste, if I may call it like this, to have something that really fits the job. AI can do that task in seconds, and it's a motivating start to develop a really strong CV or a really strong set of interview questions, a really strong vacancy. So it works into both sides of the client's journeys, employers and job seekers. It is also a tool that, as opposed to the fear-mongering discussion that it would be excluding a lot of people, it also gathers and renders a lot of access to people that maybe have not been able to use employability services, and that now have, because they had to pay for it, or services to improve career opportunities, and now have a better access that will not cost them anything, or not so much. We talked about skills-based approaches in a situation that, in the policy context that Eamon and me are usually, it's called skills shortage. I liked much more the funky cycle term that you included, Chad. I think we're in a situation where we need to look at skills much more than we did in the past, because it's just not working out with the traditional approach to matching. So their advanced technology can be a big help as well. We said that client-centered services and the role of the advisor are connected to each other, and that advanced technology is a tool to help engaged advisors, because it's not a question of whether advisors are going to be replaced. It's a question of how their engagement that they show to help the client can be improved, can be augmented, can even get a better quality, or can shift tasks in a way that those skills that an advisor has can come to work in a better way, instead of being stuck with administrative burden or more low threshold tasks. We also heard that the low budgets that some governments have to deal with in using employability measures are a push factor to go a bit more in the direction of digital first approaches, and to have clients manage their careers themselves, and just to have the capacity of government institutions be focused in a better and more effective and efficient way. And it brings the discussion of advanced technology to where all innovations are going, which is to basically accept that jobs and processes and tasks, including government tasks, are not disappearing in the form they are, but in a changing environment, they're also changing. And that's what advanced technology and the use of advanced technology is about, that to show and accept that our jobs and the way employability services have been delivered is changing significantly, and it can free up a lot of potential to deal with the real issues better than before. For example, to deal with proximity bias or low capacity. We said that the governments are moving from a delivery role more into a stewardship role, where they would govern the process of a functioning ecosystem that is supported by advanced technology for better services for clients and employers. Thanks a lot. I really hope we can continue with this discussion, because as we've seen very early in this salon, it's not only about technology; it's about the whole mindset and policy framework and cooperation framework of an ecosystem of employability professionals. Thanks a lot for your time, and
thank you,
have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.